Welcome back, everybody, for another exciting post-NBA trade deadline edition of Kings Talk. It's your girl, Lina Washington, reporting from Sacramento, joined with Sean Cunningham and Matt George, our host and friend of the Locked On Kings podcast. And of course, you see me and Sean every Sunday extensively on Toyota Sports Sector on ABC 10 if you live in Stockton, Modesto, or Sacramento. But we are fresh off of a very long post-trade deadline media availability with first-year general manager Monte McNair. He fielded several questions from obviously the moves he made ahead of Thursday's deadline, what he sees of this team in the future. And for some people, this was really their first opportunity to talk to him because we have had limited interactions, obviously, through Zoom since his hiring over the summer in 2020. But we got a lot to break down, guys. I'm wondering what you want to start with first. Obviously, a lot of moves to discuss, some new faces that we've yet to see, obviously, but we expect to see in a Kings uniform. And of course, this team is playing well. The winners of 5 of their last 6 games, fresh off a win over the Warriors at home, 141 to 119. Great performances, career performances from De'Aaron Fox, Kyle Guy, Tyrese Halliburton also contributing. And again, we have the Cavaliers coming in, looking to make it 2 wins over the Cavs in a week, but I'm wondering where you guys want to start. Obviously, we just heard from Monte McNair, a lot of comments fresh in your head, I'm sure. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think, I'll open it up because I want to open it up to both of you. And I think Kings fans waking up this morning on March 26th, the day after the trade deadline, after they've had some time to really, really digest what happened with the trade deadline, because obviously we saw the Kings being very busy. But I don't know that they got the results they were looking for. That was my personal interpretation. But my expectation going into this was I didn't think they were going to do much. Certainly we had recognized the fact that Nemanja Bjelica was going to be likely shipped out of town. That happened. Corey Joseph was shipped out of town, and you bring in 4 players. You end up with really 4 trades that happened, and you end up having to release 2 players in Jabari Parker and also with Fiondu Kabengele, who had just been picked up by the Clippers. And that, I know people think that's a little bit weird, but obviously they had an expiring trade exception. But the one thing that sticks out of Monte McNair, who always talks about flexibility going forward and having those options and not being able to, having ability to move around, looked at the deadline, and it looked like he wanted to add defense and physicality to this year as well as value. So he looked at value, wanted to attack, wanted to address the now. And I think he prioritized that over anything necessarily in the future. And fortunately, the Kings won last night. They're 20-25. I think they're right in a good spot right now for that 10th spot for that play-in game. So I think he kind of did Luke Walton a little bit of a favor. I don't think it was fireworks. In fact, I think Lina, you and I were talking about how this might be more shout out to Joe Dirt, snakes and sparklers. But this should hopefully kind of keep them with the thought to compete right now and maybe play into the future.
Yeah, overall, it was a busy trade deadline for the Sacramento Kings, but I think it's fair to say it's a little underwhelming through the standpoint of you wanted to see maybe some fireworks, and with the rumors and the smoke around some of the bigger names that were potentially available for the Kings, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, especially Marvin Bagley, that picked up a lot of steam over the last couple of weeks. The fact that none of those guys were moved, I get is underwhelming to some fans, but truthfully, I don't see what there's anything to be frustrated about or even angry about with the moves that the Sacramento Kings made. If anything, it's now, to me at least, perfectly clear what the purpose of the remainder of the season is, which is trying to win right now, trying to make a push for that play-in tournament and the playoffs on the other end of that, getting as much opportunity as you can to see what De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton can do now as the starting backcourt for the remainder of the season. Can they provide immediate success? And from what we saw from that Golden State Warriors game last night, there's certainly the capabilities of that backcourt being extremely solid. Now, I don't know if we can expect 65 combined points out of the two on a nightly basis, but either way, the trade deadline itself, maybe I wanted a few more fireworks like what we got from Chicago with the Vucevic trade, but overall, I'm not surprised by any of the moves that the Sacramento Kings made.
Those weren't fireworks, Matt. Those were franchise-altering nuclear explosions. that was not a firework.
Yeah, we saw plenty of action elsewhere in the NBA, maybe a lot more in the East than the West. But yeah, Monte McNair said it himself. They were looking to be value buyers, and there was a lot of conversation of whether or not they would be buyers or sellers, what that would look like. A lot of names kind of in the fold, but you got 4 guys coming in DeLon Wright, Mo Harkless, Chris Silva, and Terrence Davis. And Monty explained that it's options that are available to Luke Walton. There's depth added, and when we've seen guys go down, or we've seen all these different lineups and interesting lineups last night even, but obviously it led to success in the end result, which was a win and a way to at least get the morale on the right track after such a wild day. We've seen all of these guys, and even De'Aaron Fox spoke to it, how weird these 48 hours leading up to the trade deadline can be. I mean, you're looking around and like, are you going to be in the locker room next to me when we get back here tomorrow? And that obviously wasn't the case with Corey Joseph and Nemanja Bjelica. I mean, Sean, you and I witnessed it when Corey left the floor before warmups and intros and then came back, and everyone's just kind of like, yo, what's going on? It was actually Nemanja who was like, what's happening? And you got coaches patting Kojo on the back, and obviously up until last night, Luke Walton couldn't officially say anything, but he did have high praise for Kojo as he went on his way to his next stop in his NBA journey. But for these guys, I mean, a lot of these guys are still young and learning, and Monty made it clear that they want to keep this young core together and continue to see how this trajectory goes. And we've seen so much promise in De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton, who is going to receive, again, his second consecutive Rookie of the Month trophy tomorrow. And we heard from him in terms of the Rookie of the Year conversation, how that looks now that LaMelo Ball has been ruled out for the season likely. But I see this team, as I mentioned, at least contending for the 10th seed. That's where I would like to see them go. If they've seen the success that they have, why not at least give yourself a chance to have that playoff experience? Do you think that these moves will play to that possibility with the addition of these guys in this trade movement?
I mean, I guess it just depends on how much you think that these guys can fit. I mean, you mentioned it, Lina, they didn't break up the core. And if you look at last night, and granted, I think it's important to note because there is the cynical people that will watch this and go, yeah, De'Aaron Fox got his career high. And yeah, the Kings, they're stringing along a couple games, but they've fallen into that trap before. And a lot of these wins are coming over very depleted teams. I mean, look at the Lakers, look at what the Warriors last night, no Steph, no Draymond, obviously no Klay Thompson, and they just made a bunch of trades. So, I mean, that was a team that wasn't chock full with a lot of NBA players. So, but you can't look beyond that. A win is a win. I think if you saw that on paper, you said, well, hopefully De'Aaron Fox has a really good game. He did that, career high 44 points. Halliburton looked phenomenal last night, as you talked about. So that all coincides. So if you think these players can come in and fit, granted, Luke Walton keeps a very tight rotation. Who did he send out of town? Corey Joseph and Nemanja Bjelica. Corey was a very rotational player. I think that now becomes DeLon Wright. I think we can agree there that DeLon Wright comes in, fits that Corey need. He's got defense. He's got physicality in the bag. He also adds, a little bit of a spark. He adds a lot of veteran experience. He's been around the block. So that one makes sense. Nemanja Bjelica was in and out of the lineup. We don't know if Terrence Davis will be able to come in and fill that role. We don't know if that's possibly Mo Harkless stepping in. Again, Mo Harkless, another kind of shooter, offensive player, so maybe he fits that mold a little bit better, possibly. But I think the key thing is as long as this core is playing well and you can plug in some of those pieces. I mean, we've seen a lot of Justin James lately, which I know some people have been kind of curious about because all of a sudden he leapfrogged Daquan Jeffries, who had been struggling to come back from his injury. And obviously we saw what he was able to do in the bubble. So they're searching for defense, they're searching for physicality, and I think they're definitely searching for veteran experience. So if those guys can check those boxes, fantastic. I'm not expecting them all to play. I personally don't think this impacts the now as much as maybe others do. But certainly, I think it doesn't really matter those pieces coming in. They're ancillary as long as De'Aaron Fox can play at that star level that we saw when they won 8 of 9, and everyone was talking about him being an all-star. That needs to happen. I think one of the most interesting things that have happened to this team is since Marvin Bagley's gone down, all of a sudden they're winning. Tyrese Halliburton in the starting lineup. I don't know that necessarily one coincides with the other. That could be a little bit of fool's gold there, but you got to take the proof right there with the pudding and just and enjoy it, and hopefully that they can build off that.
And to add on to that, Sean, you also talk about Chimezi Metu getting minutes last night that most likely would belong to Hassan Whiteside, had Whiteside played. And I thought it was interesting and also very telling to see the Kings elect to not waive Hassan Whiteside and let him test the buyout market, which some people thought they were going to do. That was the route that they were going to go alongside Jabari Parker, who I think we all knew was going to be the one of the two players that the Kings had to release. So the fact that McNair and the Kings said, no, we're holding on to Hassan Whiteside, that further cements that they believe Whiteside can be a piece to add that defense, that physicality, that rim protection that this team needs in order to make that play and push. But Monte McNair in his press conference today talked a lot about that closing lineup that has now become the starting five for the Sacramento Kings: the Fox, Halliburton, Buddy Hield now at the 3 with Barnes at the 4 and Rashawn Holmes at the 5. And that lineup has been solid statistically all season long. So the fact that we're now getting that closing lineup as starters, and we're seeing it less broken up with the bench in the middle. Really, it was the middle of the game and sometimes early on in the game where the Kings were really falling apart and never putting themselves in great positions for that closing lineup to do what they do. But when they were in close games or when they had leads and that closing lineup was in, typically this season, they were able to take care of business. So I'm really interested to see how much of that success that lineup in particular can carry out through the remainder of the season, maybe into the play-in tournament. And then Monte McNair talking about adding this depth with Mo Harkless, with DeLon Wright. Are these pieces, even if they're minor upgrades over what Corey Joseph and Nemanja Bjelica were providing for you? To me, that it was always clear if you're going to make the play-in tournament, it's going to be because of Fox and Halliburton and even Rashawn Holmes, Harrison Barnes, that core. They were always going to be the ones to get you there. And you weren't really going to upgrade upon them, but you could upgrade your bench. And I think McNair, at least short term, has done that.
Yeah. What do you guys think about just grades in general? I hate giving grades because obviously we haven't seen these guys in uniform yet. But I've heard from my phone. I'll give you guys a little peek behind the curtain. My phone was blowing up last night. And particularly around a time, in full transparency, I was doing an interview right in the final hour of the trade deadline. And when I got done with that interview, it was Chris Webber, by the way, since this is a Kings thing. Yeah, little guy named Chris Webber. So we'll have that. You can click over there. It's probably over there. Anyway, the phone was blowing up during the trade deadline, and it ranged from anywhere from question marks to Monty with a question mark to what the F are the Kings doing to, oh, I like him. So, and there was another one that said, where are the Kings? And a lot of these are coming from national media types. And some of them are coming from other executives around the league. And it's just very interesting to see that's why I asked the question to Monte McNair today during the press conference, which was, look, and Matt, you alluded to this last week, and I kind of had to slap your wrist a little bit because some people look at these reports that get out there about, oh, they might be trading Bagley to Detroit for Sadiq Bey. They might, they might be shipping Harrison Barnes to the Celtics. Now, obviously, we know there was some discussions there. I think we can, but there's some of the stuff that gets out there, most of which you have no idea about. Did any of these trades that happened, anybody see those happening other than maybe Nemanja Bjelica? We figured he'd go. A lot of people thought he'd go to Philly. Some people thought he'd maybe go to Boston. Others maybe thought he would. I think Miami was on the list, but a little bit farther down. So it's a lot of those ones that you don't see coming, but clearly you do see chatter around players. And I'm not saying that a lot of these reports are wrong, but I do feel that because Monte McNair is a first-time GM in a situation in Sacramento where a lot of people think he might be operating out of an area of desperation, or they feel like, oh, it's Sacramento, we can fleece them. They've got a long track record of that. I just wonder what you guys felt overall with the grades of this trade, because, if you base off of that small sample size I had of national media and executives on my phone that were just puzzled, I just don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah, giving it a grade remains to be seen if we're talking about the end result of these moves. But I think if you wanted to add depth and defense and a veteran presence perhaps in this locker room that's still needing that to a certain degree, I think you certainly did that. And adding the guys that you have, you've also removed some of the players who were out of the lineup and the rotation consistently in Jabari Parker and Nemanja Bjelica, namely. And of course, Belly wouldn't have really played, I don't think, until someone had gotten down earlier in the season. We hadn't seen him for weeks. But I think, and Matt and I spoke about this earlier this week on his Locked On Kings podcast, but I'm more intrigued to see what Monty does in the off season with his first year really under his belt in this setting, in this Sacramento organization that has been known to be tumultuous, and maybe using the general manager position as a vehicle for the owner, right? To be a little bit more influential in decisions. We've heard that conversation time and time again, but I'm interested to see, and I think that will be more telling of where this organization is headed and where Monty sees it, if he makes more moves, especially with the contracts that we have coming up in Rashawn Holmes and some others. So I'm not so sure if he needed to make a big splash move on Thursday. I think that there was a lot of chatter, of course, and as the clock wound down, it seemed like it was going to be quiet. But Matt, I know that we kind of predicted it to be quiet as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with almost everything you said. My wife's a teacher, so I'll try and make her proud with this. If this is like a final grade, then I'd say that the moves that have been made are like 40%, and then 60% of the grade is what's going to happen this offseason. I'm looking at a large chunk of that being the answer to the question of what are the Kings wanting to do with Rashawn Holmes. I think it was telling that they didn't move on from the guy, that they kept him. So there, and it's clear from what we heard from Monte McNair in the press conference that the Kings very highly value Rashawn Holmes, who is arguably one of the best bargain contracts in the NBA right now. He is going to go get paid, but what is the market value going to be for him? Is that going to be determined by the Kings, by his agent, by other teams? Who are the Kings really going to be bidding against? What happens with Rashawn Holmes to me is where I really base my grade of this trade deadline, because if for some reason the money that you added to your salary with this DeLon Wright deal in particular, if that costs you the $1 million, $2 million that you could need to pry Rashawn away from another organization that's offering a same or maybe a little bit more money than what the Kings can offer, then I would say, I don't know how much I like that DeLon Wright move overall. So I'm really looking towards this offseason to see how Monty builds upon the moves that he's made. But in terms of just looking at it in a small vacuum short term for the remainder of this season, I have a hard time giving it anything less than a B.
Yeah, and I think I hear that, and I think it's also, is it talking about, is it the now or is it the future? And I get that part. I don't think, especially since Rashawn Holmes is the Sacramento Kings current player, there's nobody that's going to be able to offer him more money, and so I don't really see anybody outbidding Sacramento for him. I think it just becomes, how much do they value him? If they let him walk, they're letting him walk not because they didn't want to pay him. It's because they've got, either they don't believe in the talent, they don't believe in the sample size, they don't believe that he's worth the money that they would give him. I don't think they're going to be outbid for him. But it's also, you see someone like Marvin Bagley, who's clearly they have to, I was saying, sound like a broken record, but they're not good enough to push away and dump unproven talent. So, certainly it's an option. It's on the table. Certainly it's something you look at, and he's not untouchable by any means, but you're not just giving him away for pennies on the dollar. Like, that's just ludicrous. And I think there's some people that learned that lesson who may have thought that he was going to be out the door. So the way that I just look at just strictly this season and will this work, is this, like Lina said, is this depth? I actually don't believe that it's necessarily better depth. I think it's just different depth. I don't really think anyone outside of DeLon Wright is really going to be a contributing player. And when I say contributing, I mean filling a rotational void. And that's just left by Corey. So is that a upgrade? I don't know. I mean, I maybe, but I don't know that I believe in the depth. I mean, this team certainly wasn't deep to begin with. They had players that were on there. And I'm also saying that knowing that I was hearing from people saying, why are they giving away Nemanja Bjelica, and to me, I think when we talked about that before, it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe you're getting 2 seconds, maybe you're getting a late first to a desperate team. Who knows? I don't know that you were looking at getting 2 current players, and one of which that could really help in the here and now with Mo Harkless, but he's an expiring contract. Really the only one that has any sort of, long-term effect is just DeLon Wright going into next year, and it's like $8.5 million. So I guess it's just whether or not you believe this team can add these players and make a small push to get into the play-in game, and see if DeLon Wright can stick around, and maybe a Terrence Davis or Chris Silva pops out and you go, you know what, this guy might be worth taking a look at a little bit longer term.
Well, to me, Lina and Sean too, one of the things I like the most about Monte McNair is that I don't know much about him at all compared to kind of the last front office that was here in Sacramento, and how predictable they were at times. But we all have latched on to one of the first things that Monte ever said to us in his first press conference when he was hired, which was maintaining flexibility. He brought that word up today, and at the time, we mainly assumed he meant flexibility in terms of cap flexibility. And assuming that is the case, the Kings, as of right now, are looking at going into an offseason where, for the most part, they're pretty capped. They don't have too much wiggle room for McNair to put himself in position to make the moves that he said he would like to put the Kings in position to make, whether it's in the trade market or in free agency, the latter being a little more unlikely because we know the history of free agency here in Sacramento and how much the city has struggled to really pull those big names. So I wonder, from both of your standpoints, do you think Monte McNair or should Monte McNair have in his mind a sense of urgency to want to tackle that problem maybe around the draft to move on from a Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, or even Marvin Bagley $11 million contract? Or am I getting too ahead of myself there, you think?
I mean, it's hard to say where Monty's at, like you said, because we don't really know. But if we're, first of all, gauging on the moves that he has made, at least in drafting Tyrese Halliburton, I mean, we've seen the success there. We've seen the vision there. We've seen the result of that idea of them working together and how successful it could be. In terms of whether or not we see someone like a Buddy Hield or Marvin Bagley moving on, I personally would not be too surprised if the chatter of Marvin Bagley wanting a change of scenery. I don't blame him for it. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen in some way. And again, that is no fault of Marvin's. That is no fault of what has happened in his NBA career to keep him from providing an ample sample size of what he can do. We've seen his growth in this season. And it was so an unfortunate series of events for him, whether it be in the bubble in Orlando this summer or even in going into the 2019 season, I believe, in his injury in Phoenix, the season opener, that kept him out. It's been this variety of injuries that have kept him sidelined and prevented his full potential from being seen. And we've seen sparks of it. Of course, he has been growing and developing in this season in particular when he's been healthy. But I think just what that can do to your mental fortitude so early on in your NBA career, maybe there comes a time where there's a conversation that's had between him and the front office. We've heard rave reviews about how he's been taking this in stride. But I think of those names, of a Buddy, of a Marvin, I would be more inclined to say maybe we see Marvin moved in the offseason. I think that we have seen Buddy being more of a rotational player in recent seasons. And obviously the team has invested in him in his extension that he signed not too long ago. But I'm curious, Sean, what your feeling is, and knowing the history of this team and where you've seen it gone. If you have a temperature even on where we might be able to see Monte McNair make some kind of splash move, if any, in these next couple months after this kind of maybe subdued trade deadline. Moves were made, but maybe not the ones that we all expected, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on it, Lina. It's the conversations. I think what we know about Monte McNair and people I've talked to is Monte McNair is going to be, you're going to see Kings linked to a lot of things. And that's because Monte wants to be in on everything, I feel. I mean, that's the gauge that I get. I've been told by people who it's like, if there's people out there, he's kicking around conversations. He's constantly having conversations. He's looking at his cap. He's having conversations. He knows what ownership wants. And I think that one of the things that sticks out is I don't think they have any interest in getting younger. And what I mean by that is obviously this is going to be a pretty significant draft. And obviously the Kings, they're trying to play, they're trying to win now. They're trying to be able to compete now and earn a playoff spot. Some people think that they should probably tank. And we've seen there's no perfect science in doing that. And what's the message you send to your young players when you do that? You just extended De'Aaron Fox for next year as a max player. hey, De'Aaron, we're going to go out there and try and sabotage your season so that we get rid of the head coach at the end of the year. And then we go out and get a high draft pick and get the highest draft pick we can. You can always do that in trades. I mean, I think people forget, like, let the lottery happen, see where it falls. You've had luck in the lottery. You've been able to shoot up or you've been able to fall. So get that lottery position. And I think Monty hit on it dead right, which is you've got the trade deadline, then you've got the draft, then you have your offseason. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to be able to try to improve your team. There's no moves of desperation that he should be making. So I like the tempered enthusiasm he has. I think he has to kind of polish a turd, so to speak, in some of the players that he got in the idea that it's going to help now and position them now. I think he addressed some needs now. I don't know that it's going to come to fruition, but certainly I think it sets them up. And then you go and attack some of those things as it pertains to the conversations that are had and around the league. I don't think you have to make those decisions. I just don't think he's going to make a move as it pertains to any of those core players that is going to make them worse, or to the point where it's like, here we are, I'm going to move one of these guys, and all of a sudden we're regressing because we have to develop another young talent. If that's the case, you just hold on to Marvin Bagley. You just develop the guy you have, see what you have. I mean, the guy, as Monty said, and we all agree, has made significant improvements this year alone. It's his second NBA season. And I know I oftentimes come off as the Marvin Bagley apologist, but I mean, my goodness, look at the core of your team. They don't need to get younger. They're already going to have a young draft pick coming in. If anything, your most attractive piece is that draft pick. I mean, that is a very, very attractive. We know there's a premium on first round picks. So if all the things that we're talking about, Buddy Hield, Marvin Bagley, Harrison Barnes, other pieces, the other thing you could be dangling is that first round pick. And if you could dangle that first round pick to teams that want to get better, and I know some people might bristle at that, but that could lure you a veteran. Teams don't win with young players. So they want to be able to get guys that, as Monty said today, in their prime. And I do know that he still looks at Harrison Barnes as being an in your prime type of player who obviously has a very good effect on the players around him. I just want him to score, and I just want him to shoot the ball better than he did last night. Just score, Harrison. Quit trying to be a good teammate. Score and play good defense.
Yeah, the top five of this draft naturally has fans around the world salivating at the mouth with what they could do in the NBA, and certainly Kings fans looking at that top five thinking, oh, what could that do as part of the young core with De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton? I understand that. I also know the Kings draft history doesn't necessarily mean they're like the word guarantee should not even be in the vocabulary of any Kings fan when it comes to anything remotely to do with the draft. That being said, I do recognize, though, there is a significant gamble element to what the Kings are trying to do. Not that I disagree with what they're trying to do, but we talk about this term NBA purgatory, which is often overused. I know I overuse it, but I'm also deathly afraid of it, where the Kings make this push for the play-in tournament. They don't make it, and they're not bad enough to get a top pick, and they end up, let's say, with a pick in the late lottery, 10 to 13 range. Well, we saw the Kings get Tyrese Halliburton at 12, so like I said, you can never predict what's going to happen, but is that a better scenario? Is it worth making that push and missing out versus if you had decided to move on from a piece? Like, I'm glad the Kings kept Harrison Barnes. I'm glad the Kings, for the most part, kept that core together and stayed put. But I do understand the argument for trying to get value for Barnes and embracing losing in a season that there aren't fans in the building, trying to get as best of a draft pick as you can, and giving an even better asset for Monty to either use to make a draft selection or shop to try and bring in that elusive star to add to this core. I understand it. I get the gamble.
Yeah, and to your point, let's use Boston as an example. I think it shows good restraint that Harrison didn't go, because if Boston, let's just say, was unwilling to part with someone like Marcus Smart or part with a big expiring contract like Tristan Thompson, right? I just blanked if he's actually if expired, but something like that, something to the effect where if all you're getting is Aaron Nesmith and maybe a Romeo Langford, Kevin Pritchard, something like that, is that worth it? Is that really what you want? I mean, is that worth it to just go, okay, F it, reset, and it's not even a huge reset, but here I'm adding more young players. Adding a Marcus Smart, that's a different conversation, and obviously the trade didn't happen, so you're not. What I'm saying is, I think the whole, am I getting younger? Am I getting better? And I like the fact you have a GM that thinks I'm only going to make a deal unless I'm getting better. I'm not making a deal to just all of a sudden to hell with it and try to hit the reset button. So unless you're getting a huge haul. So I think there are people out there that think Sacramento has to be fleeced in order to get better. And I don't agree with that. I don't think Monte McNair agrees with that. I know his owner definitely doesn't want to agree with that because he wants to compete now.
So you wouldn't have supported the Monte McNair pulling an OKC and acquiring 17 first-round draft picks over the next 6 years or whatever it is? Holy moly.
See, but you know what, though? That's a horse of a different color because that's like as you mentioned in a different, that's the nuclear. That's not the firework. That's the nuclear because that sends the whole message that we're just going to blow everything up, start over. And if Monte McNair had come in and did that, I don't think anybody would have sat there and been like, hey, man, I don't fault you because it is your first time here. You just showed up. You're the new kid on the block. The franchise is you. Obviously, you've got some Joe Dumars and Vivek Ranadive hovering over you, and obviously they pull some strings too. So I don't know that you have complete control, but if that was your angle, it would make sense. We haven't done that yet, and that's not saying that they don't do that going forward. But the first thing he does is, we're extending De'Aaron Fox because we have to. We believe in him. We're not going to give up on the unproven talent, and he's showing a trajectory. So yeah, don't do that unless it's nuclear. Go nuclear, everyone.
Maybe don't throw that out there on the internet, Sean. People can take you literally these days. You never know. But, you mentioned just the kind of, I actually had friends after I was, again, we're one of the few people in the building to go to these games along with Monte McNair, who we get to see courtside with Vivek Ranadive when we get to be in the building. But after I shared that nice little move by Tyrese Halliburton on Damian Lee in the third quarter, and I don't know. I think it was Buddy who let out the high-pitched scream from the bench. I couldn't see, but I'm just guessing based on what we've observed. But when I shared that moment on my social media, I had people being like, man, they can't decide if they want to be good or if they want to suck. And I need you to pick because you never know what we saw the success in being in the middle of the road with Tyrese Halliburton. And
welcome to the life of a Kings fan.
Right. Totally. No, but I just was like, I don't know. This is how it's been for as long as I've been here as well. It's like every spring there's a little taste of what could be an 8th seed, what could be a run in Orlando, and then it's snatched away by some universal, power that just doesn't want to see Sacramento Kings basketball be great. I don't know, Sean, it's probably you since you're the one who, brought all this unsuccessful years. But
I still want to know who shouted the 40 when De'Aaron Fox was at the free throw line.
You are Sherlock Holmes in that.
Yeah, it was someone on the floor. I think it was Buddy. Kyle. I thought it was Kyle at first. He said it wasn't him. But when he sank that free throw, you just hear this 40. And I'm like, that was a little bit too clear to be Bahamian. So maybe it wasn't, but I don't know who it was, but someone was thrilled and it wasn't Fox.
Going back to the shot by Tyrese Halliburton too, we all know he's just looking for a multi-$1,000 top shot moment. And I'm excited to see what that moment ends up being worth and how many of them Tyrese scoops up himself. But Sean, I was laughing at the end of, or during the press conference last night or the post-game presser last night when you asked De'Aaron Fox if he was paying attention to how many points he scored, and Fox gives us his typical humble, I just wanted to win the game. And then Kyle reiterated the same thing. But I saw that skepticism in your eyes, Sean. I think we knew Fox was going for that 50 ball.
Yeah, he said it, and I literally called him a liar. I was like, come on.
Well, I don't think he's going to deny that at some point. It's like, why not go for 50? But
because I think much like we said, you're playing a team like the Warriors who are just depleted. And I watched you shoot those 2 threes. Nico Mannion, who just got torched, by the way. Holy God, I feel bad for him. But he gave him a little bit of room, and he shot it. And then he's like, if you think I can't hit that play, it was clean. It was like the most clean 3-point I've ever seen De'Aaron had. Comes back the next play, pulls up in transition, buries it. And that was on Bays. So I'm like, okay, you're definitely feeling yourself. You definitely know where you are. These guys are encouraging you to go for it. But you know what? Yeah, I called him a liar up until basically Kyle comes in and says, no, we were trying to tell him to go get 50. And he was like, no, let's just do that. Blah, blah. And I was like, okay, cool. Then maybe now I believe you. But at first I didn't believe you at all.
This stat came from ESPN Stats and Info, and I just thought it blew my mind. De'Aaron Fox is the second player in Kings franchise history with 80 points on 65% shooting in a 2-game span. The other was Oscar Robinson. I mean,
Robertson, sir.
Sorry,
that's a Hall of Famer.
Robertson just blows my mind. The ability of De'Aaron Fox to just take these baby steps so far. And then you go back to the Orlando bubble where it looks like he's figured it out. And then he kind of goes up and down, had that really good stretch earlier on this season. And now I don't know if there's a guy in the league who can guard him at this point in time. He just makes it look so smooth, makes it look effortless. I commented on Twitter last night. I don't even know if the guy broke a sweat at any point in this game. It just seems so smooth for him. And you talk about being worth every penny of that max contract. I'm not expecting 40 plus points on a nightly basis from De'Aaron, but I'm really getting used to 30 plus with the amount of 30 plus point games that he's put together over this last, couple of weeks. It's getting pretty incredible and pretty ridiculous at this point.
You want the contrarian? Can I be the contrarian for a moment? Because I play it so well. You're right. No, you're absolutely right. But again, we've seen this and we want to see it sustained. Not that he can sustain 30 every game, but we're seeing the averages increase. We're seeing the production. That's great, but you can't get blown by. You've got to bring it on both ends. And we've seen when this team was really bad just a couple days ago, we were seeing guys just torch him. Shake Milton. I mean, my goodness. Shake freaking Milton. Dennis Schroeder, who's not really a huge scorer, destroyed him. We know what Dame does against him. So we know De'Aaron feels this way. Buddy Hield talks about it all the time. Last year was like a broken record. He's like, I need Fox to play pissed off. And I don't know what it was last night. And maybe he's looking across the way going, if I come out and have 17 and struggle shooting or whatever, and I don't know, maybe I don't know what the thought process is, but he did what he was supposed to do, in my opinion. And he obviously did. He eclipsed that because he has a career night, and he was just unbelievable. And that stat you read off, Matt, was fantastic. And I think all three of us are amazed at the free throw numbers that he had too. I mean, unbelievable for a guy who struggled from the free throw line, made so many strides. So yeah, Matt, you're right. He's showing his worth. I'm being greedy. I want more. I need more. I need to see this sustained because the only way this team has any modicum of success is for him to sustain some of that. It doesn't have to be 30 every night, but it's got to be right around the 23, 25, 26. Get a 30 every single week. That would be my goal every week. You got to score.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of last night's game and how De'Aaron might have been feeling himself, I think the tone was set with those back-to-back steals and transition buckets by him and Tyrese in the first 2 plays of the game. It was like, oh, okay, we're just going to punk these guys all night, I guess. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, yeah, De'Aaron had some beautiful threes that looked like he was just playing with Nico Mannion and just having fun out there trying to rack up the numbers. And that's exactly what he did. And whether or not he can do that, at least up to 40 plus every night, we've seen him churn out a good 30 piece consistently. But, we mentioned the depth. I think it's also reliant on guys like a Kyle Guy, a Daquan Jeffries, a Chimezie Metu to come off the bench and provide some unexpected spark. And whether that's in scoring or at least defensively, that this team can lean on, and whether or not you can count on this specific guy every single night, but you need one of those guys, one of the 8 to 10 players that Luke Walton looks to on a regular basis. And thank goodness Chimezie Metu is back after that fractured wrist and being able to come back and provide some spark off the bench in his first kind of night out earlier this week. But remains to be seen if this will be able to be something that the Kings fans will be able to enjoy. We've seen this film before. To quote my girl Taylor,
didn't like the ending.
I did not like the ending. It went from they've won 10 of their last 11 to they've lost 9 in a row, and so it could very much swing the other way in a matter of days. So as soon as tomorrow, when the Cavs come to town, and they will be coming in mad because they lost not just but a week ago on their home floor to this team. And then they've got another brutal stretch of games, of course, competing in the Western Conference for at least a 10th seed in this play-in game. But trade deadline dust has settled. we will see what these 4 new additions to Sacramento will bring on the floor as Monte McNair continues in his first season as general manager. I'm liking the winning basketball that we've seen, guys, and I hope that it can continue. And if De'Aaron Fox can just keep up in his career high, maybe he gets a 50-piece tomorrow night. That would be fun.
I like to take mental snapshots of games like last night to hold on to in the fetal position when we get to the low struggling times. And with the ups and downs of this year, I think it's fair to expect another one is coming, just hopefully not as bad as they have been through the course of this season. Or the Kings could win every game from here to the end of the season, which, I'll put some money on that.
Oh, Matt.
Where's my optimism jersey?
Where is that?
You go find it. We're going to send our viewers off so we can get wrapped up here on the latest edition of Kings Talk, joined by Matt George. You can find him on the Locked On Kings podcast, your source for daily Kings coverage and content. You can find Sean and I on ABC 10 on Sunday nights on Twitter Sports Extra at 11:35. And of course, you can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all those fun things. But we'll see you next time on Kings Talk.